Hi, and welcome to a reading of This Third Dimension, written by Matias De Stefano and the I Am, presented by me, your friend and fellow seeker, Alex. I hope you enjoy, and without further ado, let's get into it. The Third Dimension. And the dreamer in me woke up in his dream, and in the depth he was lost, because the deeper he went, the more beauty he found. The polarity of the first dimension extends to the height, while to the width. The second dimension designs the patterns of crucifixion from which it is exempt from being born. The cross of time and space, which designs the imaginary of existence in the resonant vibration of its echoes. And in them, in her consciousness, she loses herself in love with the waves that transforms upon themselves, the profound. High, wide, and deep, the sacred trinity that makes up the fundamental concepts of the third dimension, the one we all know, experience, and live. The best known by humans because the others live in their imaginary. Imagining comes from the Latin imago, which means portrait. That is, it creates a figure within a limit, describing a reality figuratively. It is difficult to explain something objectively because, for example, try to say the first color you see. White on a screen. Well, it's not white, but the conjunction of the lenses of different primary colors, whose combination produces the sensation of white, which in turn is nothing more than photons moving at a high speed emitted in different frequency waves. That is, white is a mental construct, something figurative. So nothing we see in the third dimension is real. That's right. The third dimension is just the sensory experimentation of the imagination. That just blew my mind a bit. Well, being the axis of the ego, this breaks my purpose a bit, since my function is to be an anchor in this reality. You are an anchor. In all dimensions, as a point of reference is needed. The third dimension has a point of reference that we call depth. Profundo, meaning go deeper. Immerse yourself in the options towards the abysses of the imagination, where the lines and the points, the polarity not only converge but also diverge, where the forces fold in on themselves, creating distortion, and that distortion creates beauty. For a distorted sound generates notes, and notes create music. Distorted energy creates light, and light gives rise to the colors. The distorted matter manifests diverse forms, and the forms create realities capable of being felt. The sense, then, are the mechanisms of consciousness to receive the perceptions of the deep. You may not know it, but your brain is a wishful illusionist. How could that be? Do you remember what illusion means? It comes from luso, which means game, and so illusion is the action of playing game with somebody. The universe is like a child playing with reality. The brain then is designed to interpret this game, reading patterns and forming ideas or concepts through imagination. As we talked about yesterday in the second dimension, the mind seeks to close an image, finish it, and if it does not have all the data, it will simply close it with all invented data. This makes the brain a processing machine, but also easy to fool. As in a magic trick, a magician does not perform magic in front of the audience waiting for him, but rather removes from the naked eye the patterns the brain needs to follow or complete an image. Magic is the art of tricking the brain, not of transforming matter. Sure, it's all an act of illusionism. The notion of things is lost, and the brain begins to play with itself, creating the missing parts, creating an illusion. Thus, everything you see in material reality is an illusion interpreted by the mind. The third dimension is not a dimension of matter. It is a dimension where depth of illusions is experienced, where the magician becomes public. Oh, I get it. It's the level of consciousness where we dive right into what we've created to see it. Like the architect who made the plans for a house, and when it is finished decides to go into it. Like writers who reads his own book, the traveler who embarks on an adventure after planning his trip. Thus, the mind enters the third dimension. You just showed me a strange image that I can't describe. When you talked about going deep, the idea I had of how this happened was a spirit in another dimension that comes floating into this world and somehow gets inside the body, like someone who gets inside a suit, astronaut, or a sleeping bag. But what I just saw, it was very psychedelic. Strange, I mean. What I saw was a network of lines and planes, like a kind of computer board with many circuits, although not physical, but conceptual, where energy moved by polarity, and suddenly things began to curve as if a force were pushing flat space, creating the sensation of depth bending space-time. And as it did, so did everything. Everything consumed itself, bending inwards, and now allowing only the external to be seen, which was no longer that framework, but cells that began to duplicate themselves as if creating a body. In other words, it was the same reality, only bent. It was as if the pulses of the second dimension were formed in the third, but never ceasing to be the other. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. Perhaps the easiest way to understand it is like turning a sock inside out. What a banal way to describe an interdimensional step. But yes, I accept the simile. This is why the key to the third dimension is depth, and that is why the deeper you go into the experience of this universal dimension, the more fascinated you will end up living. You'll end up living impressive realities until you turn your sock inside out. And you go into another dimension like a wormhole, which instead of going through space like a highway, actually bends itself out into the new space without having moved from the same point, like a fish eating itself, a sphere swallowing and leaving out its inner side. The third dimension invites us to see that the deeper we go, the more we transform, discovering all the facets and layers that constitute us. Going deeper into the experience, into the integration, is the key to this dimension. Every being that has planned its reality lives, it's manifested in this existence. From the physical, the emotional, and the mental, this dimension exerts pressure on existence, leading us to live everything we have projected. It is the illusion that we ourselves have created to play, to test, and to feel what we have projected from the origin. The third dimension is the path of the alpha looking for the omega, and the second dimension is the tool that the third dimension has to be able to live. This is why each one has traced their own destiny in this reality, because we from the second dimension are the ones who have created the patterns and plans that we have folded to live this reality today. Destiny is not a purpose, but a design of our own intention to exist. Thus, the third dimension is the miracle of the other dimensions. It is the fruit of the tree. Here you have understood, without time or space, the being tried to feel what he thinks, and the way to feel is to live it. The universe designed the mental paths towards the projection and perception that gave rise to the feelings for them to manifest the senses, and thus the polarity could be lived in form of matter. The mind launched into depths of itself to discover its sensory capabilities, creating real goal of all existence, the experimentation of the universal fruit. It is here where the infinite becomes finite, where you discover the limits, where the unconditional becomes conditioned, where the network becomes a pattern, all with intention of being able to see deeper, feel deeper, know from the depths that this is where the love that you knew as external energy begins to focus, to exist as emotional limiting, bonding, and dependency factors. This is where the real king becomes the real object. The real of royalty comes from the Indo-European red, which means right, line, law, straightness, axis. That is, it knows where it's going. It has a plan, just like the second dimension. But when it bends, it returns to itself as a structure. The line becomes an object and is renamed thing, which in Latin is said res, origin of the word real. Reality is the quality of being things. And that is what the universe does. The great divine miracle is the ability of the mind to constitute itself as things. This is why I remember how happy we all felt when we were going to come to a third dimensional world for the first time. At least for me, it was of enormous excitement, honor, and greatness. The feeling that I was prepared to do something unthinkable, to live. Although it may seem absurd to you, the dimension in which you live now is probably one of the most incredible from a cosmic point of view. Since what you are capable of experiencing, feeling, learning, and enjoying is unthinkable. The third dimension is one of the most beautiful and impressive facets of the existence, and it goes through the entire universe. Of course, each star, each planet, each atom is located in the profound expression of the universe. I like that you called the third dimension as deep expression. That's what it is. It's a dream come true. And now, finally I understand that phrase better than ever, a dream come true. Ceases to be a poetic phrase, to be something literal, an inevitable process that we're living in our dreams, whether they are sweet dreams or nightmares. So now, you just have to learn to daydream, and you can experience wonders. And for that I must honor this dimension. I feel that it is our quest, that in our quest to reach the fourth or fifth dimension, above all, we discredit the third. What happens when we go from one dimension to the other? Do we really have to go to the fifth dimension and leave the third? First of all, leaving one dimension to live in another is like wanting to rip out the wall of a house and throw it down, because now I prefer sitting on the opposite wall. Second, let's understand this fifth dimension thing. In the 1960s, the peace and love movement that arose in the United States seeking to stop Vietnam War popularized the idea of many of those who called for a new age to come. Because people from the spiritual world were involved in these peace movements, the spiritual and the astrological characters began to be a way of interpreting the reality of the time. It was thus that the arrival of the age of Aquarius, of the astrological convergences, and of the dimensions from the Gnostic explanations of the cosmos began to become popular, all considering that it was the decade in which the humans sought to conquer the stars and the moon, the heavens that made us look towards the celestial vault. Since this famous decade when young people built a utopian ideal of a magical world in which the world would live in peace, harmony, unity, fleeing from the harsh three-dimensional reality of wars in Asia and the Cold War and the nuclear threats, it became popular, the concept of a magical time of Aquarius, where we would all be one again, where spiritually light consciousness would be life itself, attributes that the fifth dimension embodies. For all these decades, then, somewhat misconceptions about dimensions smeared with frustration with the chaotic life of this world have led most people on their way to awakening to believe that we are going into the fifth dimension, leaving behind the third, fleeing from the harsh three-dimensional reality of the wars in Asia and the Cold War. Once again, where spirituality, light consciousness would be life itself, attributes that to the fifth dimension embodies. So this isn't like that? No, it's not. I'm sorry to say, but you'll stay in the third until you know how dimensions work. As we said, the same are the measurements of a house. And for the fifth dimension to be a reality, then we must make sure that the third is experienced as the fifth. Turn the sock inside out. Recognize that the other dimensions are hidden within the third. It is not escaping, leaving, fleeing. The way you pass from one dimension to another is by going to the depths of the dimension in which you find yourselves living in. Living it all, at all its levels, making yourself responsible for it. Until I know how to live the fullness of the third, I won't be able to feel the fifth nor the fourth. None. A being can pass from one dimension to another, but to achieve it, it is necessary that it resonates with said dimension in each particle of its being. Going to the fifth dimension and speaking of the age of Aquarius in the 1960s became synonymous for paradise and the arrival of the Savior. Therefore, if you want to live in the fifth dimension, you had better learn to live fully in the third. Enjoy what we have created and find harmony in it, being responsible for our own creation. The limited love of this dimension is what gives you the necessary tools to understand the creative power. The third dimension is the school of the cosmic mind. You are learning in the depths of the illusion. So I dare you, live with hope. Play in life. That life is a dream, and the dreams are dreams.